With the cost of living skyrocketing and the grocery store prices hitting an all-time high, it's time to start looking for economical solutions to meals where we can save money, which is so important these days. And so in today's video, I'll be sharing 3 hearty soup recipes that come straight out of my vintage cookbook collection. And these are really gonna help you out and help you save some money. The first recipe comes from a Better Homes and Gardens cookbook, and this is for a beef and barley soup. And this is using staple ingredients that you probably already have in your kitchen, aside from the meat. So we're going to be needing to use potatoes, onions, carrots, celery, which are staples for soups, parsley, barley, and then I'm heating up my cast iron pan and putting some bacon grease in there, which is a vintage tip to save all of your drippings. So my bacon drippings are going in there, and I'll be cooking up a piece of beef short rib, which was a relatively inexpensive cut of meat. So we'll be browning that on all sides. The price of beef is really going up. And when I hit the grocery stores, I had another plan for the week, but I quickly changed that plan when I saw the price of the meat. And so soup it was. So in our crock pot goes all of these ingredients, and the recipe will be listed in the description box below. I love looking at old cookbooks, particularly from the wartime periods and the Great Depression, because women really knew how to stretch things. And in fact, they had to. They didn't have a choice. And so there is just so much to be learned from these cookbooks. And I hope to share some tips with you guys in these videos. Women back then used a lot of shortcuts. And one of those shortcuts was using bouillon cubes for their stock. And I find this refreshing because there is so much content online pushing from scratch food, and I've done that myself, but it's exhausting and it's nice to have a shortcut. So we're making our broth with the bouillon cubes, and that's going to go in the crock pot with this beef, which is going to be sitting on top of the vegetables. I didn't realize that I should have used hot water to dissolve the cubes, so I won't make that mistake again. I'm seasoning this with some salt, pepper, some dried sage that I dried myself, a couple of bay leaves, and then I'll be putting the broth and the tomatoes on top of everything. Soups are nutritionally packed with vitamins and minerals, which usually leach out of your food while cooking. But because you're keeping the liquid and using it and eating it, you're eating all of those minerals and vitamins. And so you're keeping everything in there that's good for you. And this is just so good for your immune system this time of year. And you also get not only a delicious hearty meal, but usually enough for leftovers as well. I'm setting my slow cooker to high, and now I can just go about my day, and the house is going to be smelling so good within a few hours. I just can't wait. About an hour to an hour and a half before mealtime, I'm taking the lid off and I need to get that piece of meat out so that I can take the meat off of the bones. And it was a little more difficult than I thought it would be. It didn't fall off right away. I think this might just be a tougher cut of meat, which is why it's less expensive. So I put the bones and everything back in the pot so that it could continue cooking to see if I could get more meat off a little bit closer to dinner time. If I had it to do over again, I think I would have chosen a different cut of meat that was similar in price, but maybe had a little bit more meat and a little less bone. And that was a tip I learned in the wartime cookbook that I'll share with you later, is to pay attention to how much bone you're paying for, because that's included in the weight. And so more bone means you're paying for that bone. So just something to think about. There's nothing quite like the scent of soup simmering in a crock pot. It just fills the room with the most delicious scent. And so I just couldn't wait to dig into this soup. It was thick, almost as thick as a stew. I did have to add a little bit more water to it, and I think it's because I added potato, which wasn't in the original recipe. And this soup was just delicious. So I'm taking the bone out, and I really didn't get more meat off of that bone. It was quite rubbery and tendony. This is the heartier soup out of the 3 recipes. It's definitely one that you can make again and again. It's always a crowd pleaser. And, beef is not cheap. And that little piece of short rib costed me about $8. And that's still expensive in my books, but, meat is going up in price. One of the things that I've noticed in these older vintage cookbooks is that they really set the table so beautifully and so elaborately with the most dainty of dishes and table settings. And so no matter how poor the meal was or how cheap it was, it always looked expensive because of the dishes that they used. And so having nice dishes can really have an impact on your meal. I don't have fancy, elaborate dishes, but this candle will definitely cheer us up. And we're enjoying this soup, just me and my daughter, as everyone else is still working out on the farm. This is the Good Housekeeping Cookbook from 1943. This is a wartime cookbook, and this is just chock full of all kinds of tips on stretching butter and stretching your food, and it's just so exciting. I can't believe I found it. So I have a recipe here for a fish chowder, and that's what I'll be making today, using cans of sardines, which actually are delicious. My son eats them all the time, and he made me try one, and it was so good, the smoked one in particular. Aside from that, we'll be using potatoes and onions and milk. It's very simple and very easy and delicious. We'll be peeling and dicing 5 potatoes, and 3 onions. And that's all going into the soup. And this is a soup that you make right at dinner time. So we're not doing this in the slow cooker today. This is going right on the stovetop. Back to my bacon drippings, I'll be cooking my onions in about a teaspoon of drippings. And these are just gold to have around. And they honestly last so long in the fridge. It's so worth keeping. So all of those onions are going to go in the pot and we'll be cooking those first. I bought 2 different types of sardines. The Brunswick variety was only $2.19 a tin, and the Millionaire variety was over $3 a tin, but I wanted to try both. Now, the smoked sardines are absolutely delicious and add so much flavor. I knew I wanted to include those in the soup. And the meat from the sardines is very meaty, it's very textured, and it just is very, very good. Now, this original fish chowder recipe included actual fish that is raw, but I saw other recipes that included tinned fish, so I thought, why not? So we're adding 4 cups of water, the 2 tins of sardines, as well as the potatoes in with those onions. And that's going to cook for about 20 minutes. You want your potatoes and onions to be cooked and soft. I'm also including a teaspoon of salt and some pepper to the pot so that it can flavor the soup now while it's cooking. Canned fish is very economical, especially with the price of frozen fish or fresh fish. It can be quite expensive. So buying canned fish is something that will stay in your pantry and you can just pull it out when you need it. This is a quick meal to put together last minute. It doesn't take long. So once our vegetables are soft and cooked, we're going to be adding 4 cups of milk and either a can of evaporated milk or a cup of light cream. And I had cream, I didn't have the evaporated milk. And we're not going to boil this once we add the milk. We're going to be just bringing this up to a nice temperature and shutting the heat off because we don't want to boil the milk. In this cookbook, there were recipes for chowders and there were recipes for bisques. And I didn't know what the difference was, so I looked it up. A chowder has chunks to it and texture, whereas a bisque has more of a creamy texture because it's pushed through a sieve. And I definitely prefer more of a textured soup, so I wanted a chowder. The chowder is meant to be served with crackers, and I definitely decided on the saltine crackers because that is a classic. That is something that you'll see in old-time diners with a clam chowder, and this is just something that is very nostalgic. I haven't had something like this in years, and it was a treat. By looking at the soup, you might think it needs to be thickened. However, the crackers being crumbled into your soup was a way of thickening the soup. So you crumble them in that soup and you let them sit for a few minutes and they soak up some of the liquid, and that thickens your soup. This is a soup I'll definitely be making again. It was really good and very simple to make with pantry staples. The third soup I'm making is a French onion soup, and this might just be the simplest and least expensive soup you can make because the main ingredients for this soup are onions and beef bouillon, cubes or powder. And that's the main ingredients in this soup. I did jazz up the flavors just a little bit, but the original recipe for my wartime cookbook was very, very basic. So I had about 5 small onions. We want 4 cups of sliced onions. You will be crying a bit after slicing these onions. If you have a food processor, now is the time to use it. It'll help. The recipe called for 5 tablespoons of butter, and so I didn't mess around with drippings. I wanted to keep to the original recipe. Now the secret is that we want to cook these onions over a long period of time on a medium to low setting until they're browned, which actually takes quite a long time, 20 to 30 minutes. I added some salt to the onions to help with them releasing a little bit of their liquid. And I'm getting some water on the boil because I don't want to make the same mistake that I did earlier with the bouillon cubes. I want to use boiling water to dissolve it. The recipe states to use 5 beef bouillon cubes and 5 1/3 cups of water. Now, I wanted to make a little bit more stock than that because I'm feeding quite a few people. So I wanted at least 6 cups of liquid. So I added about 6 packets of beef bouillon. This recipe was very basic, like I said, but I wanted to include just a few little extras that I knew would add extra flavor. I have my homegrown sage, and I also have thyme out in my garden, so I wanted to include those flavors, as well as some bay leaves, and I added a little bit of Worcestershire sauce in with the bouillon cubes. This is not a slow cooker recipe, but I knew that putting it in my slow cooker and letting it have extra time to cook would definitely benefit the flavor. And so I decided to just let it go in my slow cooker all day long. This is as browned as they're going to get. I'm adding some boiling water to this just to loosen up any bits that might be on the bottom so I can extract every bit of flavor from those onions. This is going straight into my slow cooker, and then I'll be adding that broth to this. You might consider this a peasant style soup because it really is the bare minimum of what you would have in a household. Onions are a pretty big staple, and beef bouillon is not very expensive. So this is quite a delicacy, honestly, for the price. This was a delicious soup, and I had to work today, but as I was working in our basement, the smell was wafting and I was getting excited. This soup is served over toasted or day-old bread that is hard. And so I'm cutting up this bread and I'll be toasting it in the oven. This would be an excellent way to use up leftover bread. And women of the past had all kinds of recipes to use up leftover bread. They also included breadcrumbs in so many recipes. So they really did use every little bit of food that they had. Now in this recipe, it calls for Parmesan cheese, but I didn't have that. I had mozzarella, so that's what I'll be using. I toasted this bread at 350 degrees, flipping it halfway through. We are about to get a cold snap, and so all of the boys are outside working on the farm, and I'll be eating alone tonight with this soup. But because it's in the slow cooker, they can have it whenever they're done, and the bread is already toasted and ready to go. So we're going to be pouring the soup over top of this bread just to cover it, and then we're going to be sprinkling it with the cheese. And traditionally, you would probably put this under your broiler and get it all bubbly and browned. But in the old cookbook, it doesn't say to do that, and so I'm not going to do that today. I'm just going to have it as is. I was completely blown away by the flavor of this soup. I would give this a 5 stars. This was probably my favorite soup out of the 3, and such a humble and simple recipe. This will be a staple in my household from this moment forth. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button. I share new videos every single Wednesday, and I hope to see you next week. Take care and have a wonderful day.